Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is a Trailmaster MB 202. Good morning, guys. It is a whopping -2 degrees today. It took 5 days to get this JB Weld to set. And as you can see, it did not go uneventful. After 2 days, it was still soft, so I ended up working some more hardener into it and then left it under a heat lamp for about 12 hours. I'm going to take this thing outside. I'm going to grab a sanding disc. And I'm going to let Big Herc do most of this heavy work. I got the knockdown done. And the final base layer is still hardening up some, so I got my heater set up and we'll just let that happen for a little while. Then I'll come back and I'll hand sand this thing out. It'll look prime time. I got a couple things taped off. I'm going to tape off my fork tubes here. I'll sand it down. I'm ready for the good stuff. I got my spray bomb done. It's pretty cold out, so the next step, I'm going to bring this thing inside, let it sit in front of the heat, cure up a little bit. See if we can't get that paint to tighten. This frame is just about cured up from the last coat that I put on it. While it's drying and doing its thing, we're going to attempt to install this custom chain tensioner. There's only 3 of these in existence. One of them, somewhere out in the West, running wild on the racetracks. The other one, well, it's right here, guys. And the third one, well, that's a secret. From what I understand is this is to be installed in line with the stock bushing for the swing arm. Right here at the pivot. We're going to be replacing the original bolt with a longer one, and we have some washers to work with and a couple rubber O-rings to keep dirt and such out. This is held on with a nylock nut in grade 10 hardware. We have a couple springs, and when we finally get it installed, we can even add this little grease fitting. The idler is a sprocket that is on a bearing. There's some washers and such there too. Probably to get it aligned with the chain. So, we're also going to need a chain. The chain we're going to be using today is the Firepower. This is a mid-grade motorcycle chain. I got this from studsracing.com. It actually seems pretty nice. It says Japan right on it. 420 FPS. This chain does have its own style master link, so I was sure to order one of those too. I have my chain brake here, my wrench. I think I'm just going to cut a chain that fits fairly loose. Right now, we're about in the middle of the axle slots. I cut my chain and I also loosened my brake adjuster bolt, my axle bolt, obviously the axle nut, both of the tensioners, and there is our length of chain. So I went with a link that is basically going to fit right where it's at. So it's going to have to scoot forward in order for this lever to engage. It needs to actually do something, right? So you leave some slack in the chain. So I guess, well, I'm not going to guess. I'm going to put the chain on next. That's what I'm going to do. We'll leave it nice and loose. Now that I have my chain on and it's acting as my entire reference point, I'm going to be removing this bolt and nut for this pivot on the swing arm. Remember, we're going to replace it with this big one right here. When you pull this bolt out, it's not like the whole thing's just gonna fall down. We have our suspension and this pivot connected laterally. So the other side is holding it right where it needs to be. Here's how this works. Here's the original bolt, little peewee. Over here, little big kahuna. Okay? We have one washer on there. We have our nylock nut. That's going to go on the other side. On the inside of this tube, there is what I believe to be bronze bushings. I know white lithium grease works good with those. These washers with these rubber seal type grommets, what you do is line those up, right? You make sure they're somewhat centered on the washer as you're tightening this thing, and those will press up against this like a seal. Now when you squeeze this thing, it doesn't have to be super tight. You just want to start bringing it home and setting these like gaskets. I'll show you. Put a washer on that bolt, set it through. Next, I'm going to put one of these washers with one of these O-rings so that the washer is going like this against that pivot mount. If I get you over here, okay, see? So I have the washer on first, see it? And the O-ring is next to it. Those go right up against the face of that. Next is the armature itself with the bushings inside all lubed up. The last thing I'll do is cap it off with another one of those O-rings, a washer, and a nylock nut. I have everything in place, but it's not tight yet. Obviously, we have to deal with our chain alignment. So, now I'm going to take the sprocket and all of this hardware off, and I'll get this out of the way. I have my wheel pulled back to where I want the axle set, and I just have my bolt snugged, pretty snug, but everything is straight, and what that does is brings the chain somewhat into alignment. I ended up with a fitment issue with the washers and these rubber rings. So, put those aside. Those are for the sprocket. What I did was got a big steel washer that the bushing itself could sit inside of. So this is sitting against, you know, the other side of this, like, you know, flush, and it's sitting with the bushing inside of it. So no matter how tight I make this, this is constantly sitting freely right on top of that bushing. Over on the other side, I just have a washer and my nylock nut. So I'll be able to bring that thing home a little bit. Again, I don't want to crush that bushing up against this too bad. So at the same time, the arm is too long on the top, so I'm going to trim that. And that's why there's multiple holes. Same on the bottom. I have plenty of slack. I don't think I'd want much more than that. So I'm barely kissing the chain right here. Less up here. We don't need all of this length. I'm probably going to take it down to the last two holes. I'll take these two off. I'll cut it right there. Try to round the end out. So I might give it a little Bensky in the vise too, just to bring it this way. With it in the vise, you can kind of see what I'm working with. I'm going to try to bend it like this so that when this is on here, this arm goes away from the chain. Here it is, cut, and bent so that we're not touching the chain. Now I'm going to attempt to install this idler sprocket. There we go. If I lift the chain off this thing spins like butter. So what I did is the sprocket is offset. See how it's shallow on one side and deep on the other? Well, in order to get it where my alignment works, it was easier for me to go with the skinny side against the arm. Alright? And I put a bunch of the small spacers in there so that when I tighten this side, you see how it can't go up against the arm because those spacers are pushing against the side of the bearing. This side has the snap ring that holds the bearing in there. I have one of those little spacers in there and then one of the bigger ones. And I'm able to get the end of my bolt through my nylock. So that should be peachy keen once this thing has some tension on it. I like the shortened length. Now we have to achieve tension. So we're going to have to add our spring so that this thing is live. I found a different spring sitting in my box. This one is almost double looped. So when I hook it to something, we might have to, drill a bigger hole to make sure it goes through, but that's really gonna hang 10. Now, there's nothing to really weld a bracket to. I looked at welding something to this, but where we'd be pulling back, even if I did like a stud this way, with the spacer, and I had the spring come straight back this way, the issue would be this pulling this way and bending the tab, okay? So we don't have a lot of structural material in this pipe. I could stuff something in the bottom if we ever did have, one of these situations. Or if I did weld something to it and I blew through this, we could ram jam something else in there and have more to grab onto. That's a lot of work. So we have this piece of sheet metal that comes standard on the Trailmaster. It's held on by 3 bolts on 3 tabs, and I'm thinking if a guy drills a hole through this side panel and puts the right bolt and washer and such, we might be able to come up and through with our spring. Once this is pulled back and there's tension on this, it's not that great a distance. So what I have to do now is get this spring attached to this arm, and then we can figure out where the other end is going to fall over here. Won't you look at that, huh? I didn't even have to drill it out. I was able to twist it around and get it through. I just used an Allen's wrench to pry up in between the two loops so that I could start it, and then just kind of worked it around. Cool, man. Now this just has to get connected somewhere up here. I went for that second hole down, the one in the middle, so that we have leverage, but we can kind of sneak and just barely, you know, touch that bar right there. Now, from the looks of it, we could bend it up and probably grab this one here, but I think we'll stick with the original plan. That way we're not stressing the spring and we're kind of coming below this section as much as possible. So I put a little stretch to it right about there. I drilled a hole big enough for a rubber insert that I had. They fit real snug. Alright, there it is. Next, I have a bolt with a washer. That'll go through. And then I have a washer and a nut that'll be going on the back. I just sourced a little bit longer bolt, but did the same exact thing. It's even the same thread. What I wanted to do was get more of those threads exposed. We're going to be pulling the spring up and on like that. So I'm going to need probably a couple washers, a nylock nut or a lock nut to hold this thing on. This is working, but I think we can do a little better. When this pulls like this, it engages, it's going to want to pull down away. So I think I might actually have to use a stiffer spring. I could try moving this hole out this way and getting a more direct and stiffer pull with this spring, but I'm going to see if I can do something with that hole first. Here we go. I ended up using one of the springs that came with the tensioner. It has smaller loops, so I omitted the washers that I had on my stud up here. I'll give it a pull. You can see we have good tension, and where everything has round surfaces right here, we should get minimal wear. Over here from the side, you can see what it does. This is supposed to work in unison with the swing arm and the tension on the chain from the drive. When the bike is going forward and the pulley spins this way, it pulls tension on the top chain. When it does that, it pulls the bottom chain away. The spring and the tensioner mechanism pushes the chain back up and then guides it onto the rear sprocket. we're going to try to do even better. I just went ahead and made this metal bracket. Very, very simple. I then drilled another hole and added another one of my inserts. This bracket attaches just like so. Now we're going to make our stud come through lower and at a better plane with our lever. Here we are, with everything attached, and our spring now at a better angle. I already checked when I compress the suspension, I'm not hitting the spring up here. That has a pretty nice return. It's definitely a little better than it was before. Now that the tensioner's installed, I just set my back axle at 40 foot-pounds and tightened my bolt for my brake adjuster. We'll just give it a roll. Oh yeah, she's smooth. The other thing that these tensioners help with is removing stress from the bearings in the jack shaft. The way it does that, well, we don't have to keep the chain as tight as we would if we didn't have it. When that chain is super tight, it pivots off of the jack shaft and really wears on the bearings. Up next, we're going to install some new handlebars and take a look at some functional bodywork. Because as always, it's a work in progress. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.